Introduction. Responding to global issues which can be linked to the practice of resource sovereignty, global justice thinkers have contested the norm of the permanent sovereignty over natural resource, arguing that claim to permanent, full, alienable, and the absolute right of a state to natural resources within their boundaries clearly undermine efforts to address this global issue. Resource sovereignty is a legitimate outcome of inclusive, egalitarian, and multilateral and consent-based process of international lawmaking that is facilitated by the United Nations. It reflects an attempt to establish a new post-colonial international order, and it also gives an economic expression to its normative principles and aspirational such as sovereignty, equality, equity, non-intervention, and self-determination. From the perspective of this historical movement of the building the international order in the aftermath of World War II, territorially determined the resource right or an economic corollary of state sovereignty. Its emerge and legal codification mark a profound transformation of the international order, which occurs under the impact of decolonization and universalization of statehood of the second half of the 20th century. Global justice thinker Charles Bates, one of the most prominent global justice thinkers, argued that our placement within border of contingent and hence morally arbitrary as a way of determination of the scope of justice, because borders are contingent and the states cannot plausibly make exclusive claim to natural resources within their borders. Hillel Steiner suggests that natural world is owned in common by each person equally and argued for a considerable global redistribution of goods and resources. Thomas Pogge proposed to remove full property right with respect to natural resources from states and their governments and to reduce the global resource divided to be used to fund of eradication of world poverty. So, according to global justice thinker, state borders principally do not represent relevant ways of establishing the scope of justice. State borders thus do not constitute the boundaries of resource right. Global justice thinker argue that that resource right have different scopes and entitlement to resource and redistribution of resources are based on principles other than those which are peculiar to states. So I cannot offer an analysis of global justice approaches to resources here, and that is to say that the disregard of existing international system of the state and its sociological and legal validity, the refusal of the aspiration that an international system of a state would become a society of equal and cooperating states who respect each other's sovereignty, autonomy, and at the same time abide by common standard and global norms respect. And there are compelling historical political reasons not to dismiss the principle of permanent sovereignty over natural resources. To be sure, the legitimization of the principle of resource sovereignty by the politics of international law does not suffice. Permanent sovereignty over natural resource cannot be defended just as element of legitimate positive law. In line with this, about the transformation of state sovereignty and the establishment of international regime of human rights, the absolute state-based system of resource sovereignty by subjecting is to a more expansive set of limits and duties derives from a higher ground of justice, similar or directly derived from a higher ground of which human rights are an expression. In other words, to insert norms and principle in the concept of sovereign territorial resource right, which indicate more straightened limit to state resource and which establish basis for a system of global governance capable of addressing controversial practices of states, such as unlimited and environmentally harmful exploitation of natural resource or economic exploitation or devastation of global commons. Human rights, both are theory and as a practice, have direct normative and methodological application to the problem of resource right. Now, how? If we rephrase the existence of human rights in terms of combined ground of justice, the existence of human right, their philosophical foundation, and the establishment of international regime of human rights express the fact that there is a global order which is irreducible to action of a state and which generate its own principle and justice. There are different ways how to demonstrate the existence of a global order. For example, it can be effectively traced to the process of globalization and linked with various sets of rule and interference that constitute global order. Sorry. It can also be traced to international regime of human rights. Human rights are grounded in normative premises about what all humans on earth have in common. The approaches to the essence of distinctiveness of human rights vary and rely on account of human agency and anatomy, basic interest, human capabilities, human dignities. Now, sorry about that. What unites these approaches in the assumption that there is a conception which appeals to the significance of certain features of human life and its valuability, and that the establishment of human right is necessary to protect this distinct feature of human life. Matthias Rey suggested that we call the universal features of human life simply common humanity and think of it as a non-relationalist ground of global justice, while shared membership in a state remain the most significant ground of justice. State-framed domestic justice must integrate principles associated with other grounds such as common humanity and hence comply with human rights which are its expression. This universal ground does not stand in contrast to domestic justice, but it is one of the most important grounds. However, it gives rise to an international community and global governance institution, political and legislative system of the UN, courts, monitoring agency, transnational actors, which assist individuals and groups claim their human rights and provide mechanism for sanctioning human rights violation on a global level. Common humanity on a ground of global justice might be correlative and perhaps even implied in another ground of justice with a global scope, humanities, and a collective inhabitation of earth and common ownership of the resources, crucial for everyday survival and fulfillment of the basic needs. The idea of the inhabitation of the earth by humankind as a whole not only suggests that the globe in a holistic, indivisible sense is the dwelling space of humanity and a very quintessence of human condition which need to be preserved, but also that earth is interconnected system of resources everybody needs for their survival and for the satisfaction of their basic needs. In the most basic sense, the fact of collective inhabitation of the earth thus expresses the fact that there are resources which are common to human prior to moral claim of individuals or group based on various ground, labor, activity, occupancy, etc. The holistic conception of the earth, the inhabitation of it by the humankind, and the distribution of its resources, which does not pay heed to firmly entrenched and yet historically contingent territorial jurisdiction of sovereign state, can certainly lead to a formulation of a set of demands on states and other collective to occupy and use the earth in a manner that respect the equal status of all individual as a member of humankind occupying the earth. A concrete set of norms, principles, rights, and duties is still to be collaborated, and it is an urgent task for philosophers and social scientists for the 21st century. When imagined from the perspective of environmental issues linked to resources sovereignty, the territorial expansion, primacy of the development, and the failure to protect global commons, the following tasks seem to follow from the assumption of the principle of the common inhabitation of the earth. So, first, we need to foster a philosophical discourse about intrinsic non-economic value of nature or of resources which represent global commons, and about interest humans have in protecting environment. And second, we need to elaborate a conception of global environment overlying the division of earth into sovereign territories, as well as further elaboration of the concept of global common, which correspond in the vital ecosystems like ozone layer, atmosphere, rainforest, climate change, ocean ecosystem, etc. So, a systematic and consistent framework and international law jurisdiction for this domain located outside and overlying the boundaries of states need to be developed, such that better respond to the need of responsible and sustainable use and conversion of the environment. Last but not least, the strengthening the concept of sustainable development is required, such that provides a clearer set of limits on states in exercise of their resource sovereignty.